this is a moment for us not to adjust to things that are so fundamentally unjust.
Since fleeing South Africa's apartheid, Kumi has scaled oil rigs and protested from the Arctic Ocean to the Alberta tar sands.
The time of playing political poker with our planet has to be over right now.
Everything is a toxic mess. What we want is a transition out. But, what we have is an addicted society, and the fossil fuel industry continues to push those addictions.
Winona has stood in opposition against coal and uranium mines, dam projects, and oil pipelines.
It's not like I'm standing here as a matter of choice. I'm standing here as a matter of necessity.
One of the challenges we face is how do we keep engaged in struggle for such a long time when quite often we're winning battles but losing the overall war for justice. I draw my inspiration from a true story that I experienced as a young activist when a friend of mine, Kumi Naidoo, was killed together with 3 young women from my home city, Durban. And I had to think about the last conversation I had with him when we were fleeing into exile in different directions, where he asked me the question, Kumi, what is the biggest contribution you can make to the cause of justice? And I said, giving your life. And he said, you mean going, getting shot and killed and becoming a martyr? I said, I guess so. And that was what was happening in South Africa in the 80s when he asked me that question. And then he said, no, that's a wrong answer. He said, it's not giving your life, but giving the rest of your life. And when he died, I had to think about that. And in that is a wisdom that says the struggle for justice is a marathon and not a sprint. And people might forget that when Nelson Mandela was fighting the good fight, he was reviled. When Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Mahatma Gandhi, many others, at the time they stood up for justice, they were reviled. But history then records that, in fact, they were precious assets that humanity created. So I was curious to know, Winona, what gives you the courage to wake up day after day after day to say, even though the cards are stacked against us, I'm still going to stand up for justice?
First, I live in the most beautiful place the Creator could have been, and so every day I look out and there was trumpeter swans before I left. The wild swans, they live with me. And I was like, that's who I work for. I work for the swans and I work for the horses and I work for Mother Earth. I don't work for the state. I don't work for the, and I think that in itself is pretty much a good reward. But, I just spent the last 8 years trying to protect my territory from a Canadian multinational named Enbridge that just put in a tar sands pipeline, Line 3. Now, a $9 billion tar sands pipeline at the end of the fossil fuel era, you don't get a tiara for that one. You don't get a crown. Yeah. Everybody is divesting from oil. Even Harvard, my alma mater, finally started its divestment policy. The Saudi sovereign fund divested, So you're at the end of the era, and this last dinosaur has got to shove a pipeline down your throat. And so every day I stood up, I lived on the river. 1,000 people were arrested fighting this pipeline. A lot of Indigenous women. They put the pipeline in during the pandemic. And I can see, as your brother who passed away, in the 1990s could see, is that the systems are not working. But the longer that you fight them, the more that things change. And as I look out there, I see that other pipelines did not get through. The Keystone XL pipeline was canceled. Yeah. The Constitution pipeline was canceled.
And many of those pipelines were spoken about as if it was a fait accompli. It was definitely...
That is right.
And the resistance from
the little people like us, the little people like us that keep standing up. And our battle is long from over with Enbridge. So, time will tell how the deconstruction of this industrial system occurs. We hope it occurs in a way that provides a lot of jobs for a lot of people, because taking out pipelines is a lot of labor, and the just transition, or however we call it, the rebuilding, the restoration economy will take a lot of work. you know, and that opportunity is the opportunity to build an economy that makes sense.
So that's very optimistic in the sense that you're saying the mountain is steep and it has to be climbed, but we're going to climb it however difficult it is, right? This decade is the most consequential decade in humanity's history. What in struggle we are able to achieve over the next 10 years will determine what kind of future we have, particularly for people in small island states, the least developed countries, and so on. So I believe that if we're going to win right now in a short time space, there are far too many companies that are doing bad things in the front end, and we probably don't have time to go after each of them separately. I think what we need to do is follow the money and shut the flow of capital at source so that as many bad polluting projects that are taking us to the climate cliff is stopped. Does that resonate with you at all?
No, I mean, I think that that is a strategy. I mean, I was arrested. I was charged with 1,000 other people. I spent 3 days in jail fighting a Canadian multinational and watched Biden turn his back on us. You know, what we need to do definitely is go to the financial institutions. We fight them on the ground because $2 billion in cost overruns is not good for your investors, right? The longer you fight them, the more expensive the project gets. But what we need is the people, you know, the 1% that are making all the money, they have children too. They have grandchildren too. And the divestment movement is growing. And that is one thing that we are grateful for, to keep divesting. Don't put your money there, but make the future instead.
So I feel that one of the challenges we have is we have to get better at communicating. How can we communicate in ways that much larger numbers of people can easily understand that we are destroying ourselves, we are shooting ourselves every day and killing the possibilities for our children to be able to prosper in the future? And I'm curious to know about, within Indigenous culture itself, what we can learn. Because what I feel is that right now we need to use arts and culture, for example, much more as a way to communicate what is happening rather than, you know, long documents and complicated policy statements.
I agree. This month in my language is called Gashkad no Gizis, which means a freezing over moon. It turns out that there is no moon in Ojibwe language that is named after a Roman emperor. You know, don't have a July, don't have an August, don't have that. And so, like, if you have a worldview that doesn't have to do with empire, which a lot of the world does, you can think a little differently than if you're, like, preoccupied with, you know, the maintaining of empire, you know. In our prophecies, Anishinaabe people, they talk about this as the time of the seventh fire. And in our prophecies, we're told that we have a choice between two paths. Long time ago, they said one path is well-worn but scorched. The other path is not well-worn and it's green. And it would be our choice upon which path to embark. That's our instructions. Almost every Indigenous society has exactly the same teachings. And the other thing that my society or my Indigenous teachings don't have is we don't have Armageddon. What we have is birth, death, and rebirth, just like a cyclical world. You know, it is fall. Dagwagan, it is fall. The leaves are falling outside. Then they go down, we get snow, and then it is quiet. It is quiet. Then we think, we remember, and then it is reborn in the spring. It is reborn. In many of our teachings, we say this is the fourth world or the fifth world, you know, that we have to remake because humans make a mess. That's what we do, and then we remake. This is our time to remake. Get over it. Change is inevitable. It's a question of who controls the change. And we want to be the ones that are the agents of change. Now, we got to put our minds together. I mean, a great leader, Sitting Bull, great political leader, he said, let us put our minds together to see what kind of future we can make for our children. You know, the answers are people like you, me, many more, not some guy, you know, over there at COP, big guy in the government. You know, the minds together is all of us.
But the difficulty we have is that while we need to put our minds together, colonialism's biggest trait was divide and rule, right? And so we are sitting with the situation right now, and you know this as well as I do, that people have been divided by false promises. Even Indigenous communities have been divided, as you know, where companies come in and sell a false prosperity and so on. Because one of the things that we have to figure out right now, I think, is, for example, people who work for oil, coal, and gas companies. They are our kin. They are our brothers and sisters. They didn't say, we want to work in oil, coal, and gas, right? They were told that that's the way you deliver energy. Now, when we say we need to make the transition, there are people within those industries who feel threatened, right? And that's why you and I are advocates for a just transition, right? So that people will either be retrained for a renewable energy industry, or if they're close to retirement, they should be able to retire with dignity and so on. But how do you think we deal with the challenge of winning people over who have been led to believe that the current system serves them, even though it certainly doesn't?
Well, I think the pandemic is a pretty good wake-up for everybody. And the fact that, you know, people don't want to go back to business as usual is quite clear in the United States. And so in that, there's this opportunity to kind of liberate yourself from all of that other thinking and figure out what you want to do. And I think a lot of people are doing that. In North America, I see North Dakota, oil state. What are they training their people for? Wind turbines. Why? Because North Dakota is the windiest state. Why are you doing oil, North Dakota, when you could be doing wind, you could be doing hemp, you know, hemp and linen. I mean, you know, this talk about that. I mean, the solutions are there. I mean, you know.
Talk a little bit about hemp.
Right. Yeah. This is the thing is, so I've been growing hemp for 6 years. I have a permit from the state of Minnesota and a permit from the federal government to grow hemp. I grow fiber hemp. I call this the new green revolution because, well, you could replace the materials economy with hemp. You could sequester carbon with hemp. You know, all that cement out there, if it was a country, it'd be the third largest country in terms of CO2 emissions in the world would be cement. What if you went to hempcrete? You know, what if you used building systems that stored carbon instead of were carbon intensive, like the landscape or the cityscape that we have? You know, so I'm saying the answers are there, and it is not necessarily new. It's the good thinking that we need. Oh, I see a question that looks as if.
Hi, my name's Sarah. I'm calling in from Wiyot territory in Northern California. My question has to do with youth. A recent survey of 10,000 youth across the globe reported that 77% feel that the future is frightening. Kumi talked about the next 10 years being very important. I'm thinking about the youth climate movement. I'm curious what advice you have for them, given that the burden has been handed down to them.
Firstly, I would say young people and the youth movement have kept people like me going over the last couple of years. It's been a source of tremendous inspiration. In fact, I did a tweet after the declaration of COP26 came out. I said, it's okay, take the night and cry that we have been criminally betrayed by the climate negotiators, but on Monday, the fight continues. But the other thing I would say to young people is they have to resist this so-called wisdom when we say young people are the leaders of tomorrow, right? Because if young people wait to take leadership tomorrow, there might not be a tomorrow for young people to be able to exercise that leadership. The one thing young people have is freshness of perspective. You know, their lenses can look at old problems and look at it in a different way. And I think that is what is critically needed right now. We need a new sense of imagination. But the most important message I have for young people is do not let those that have been climate denialists, those that are speaking lies, those that have driven us to this point of destruction, have the benefit of thinking that they have destroyed your spirit. The way we do our activism should be a source of energy, because we're going to need a lot of inspiration and energy on a daily basis if we're going to turn things around.
Hello.
Hi, I'm currently in South Africa. I'm South African. And I always wonder about how environmentalism is a space of privilege at the moment. And so my question is, are there current examples of how marginalized populations are included and informed on the conversation and in actioning climate justice?
You know, from my perspective, you know, I live on a reservation in northern Minnesota called White Earth. I'm Ojibwe or Anishinaabe, and we're looking out there and looks like y'all don't have it together. So we're going to rebuild our local food system because your food system doesn't work. And then we're going to make solar thermal panels so that poor people who live in a cold place can get heat in a really efficient way. So making sure that what the changes that are needed are accessible to the people who need them the most, it has to be paramount in a just transition. It's not about just making sure that the top guys get everything. The justice is in that the rest of us who are feeling the impacts of climate change also have that. You know, and the thing is that the next economy is not about competition, it's about cooperation.
The only thing I'd add to it is the question of how do those with privilege handle the privilege.
That's right.
Right? And I think that it's important that even within civil society, right, within our movements, we need to address the questions of power imbalances that exist. So I just put up my hands and say that even it's not just a question of government and business shutting out the most marginalized, but even those of us that seek to serve, and that work needs to be done.
You know, the other thing I just want to say is the 1% got to do their part. If you're in the 1%, stand up for the rest of us because your kids are with us, you know?
Yeah.
So everybody can, that's how there's privilege and then there's the responsibility of privilege. So stand up for your responsibility. Hello, my friend.
Thank you so much for this enlightened discussion. What lessons could the youth climate movement take from the anti-apartheid movement, and how could those lessons then help us pressure the governments to stick to the 1.5 Celsius pledge? Thank you.
But by the way, where are you speaking from?
Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, Caribbean.
Oh, wonderful. So right now, you know, we've got a crazy situation. There are even sort of foundations and universities and even some religious institutions who say they're all opposed to climate change, but actually some of their own investments are still sitting in fossil fuels. It's changing fast. But so I think one of the things that helped us in South Africa to make the system delegitimized was by people who had money. And that's why Winona is so right. The people at the top who have serious money, if they were to step forward and say, we're shifting every cent of ours away from dirty energy investments, but then make sure you shift it into something positive, right? Because also I think the people who have made money from an unjust system that has driven us to this point of destruction also have an obligation now to use their money and resources in ways that are genuinely positive, right? And so investing in innovation, in young people and so on, that's one. The second lesson I think that we can draw on is the importance of civil disobedience. If history has taught us anything, when humanity has faced a major injustice or a major struggle or major challenge, those struggles only move forward when decent women and men step up and say, enough is enough and no more. We're prepared to put our life on the line if necessary. We're prepared to go to prison if necessary. But I do think that the other thing that we can learn from the anti-apartheid movement is, which Mandela taught us, is always to be clear that we are fighting a system and we're not fighting people, right? So Mandela always was clear about saying we're not fighting white people, we are fighting a system that perpetuates white domination, which is very different. And that's why we need to convince the people who are benefiting from the current system that in fact it is in their interest to change, because both the rich and poor children's lives are threatened by climate change, and hopefully that is a message we can communicate. But Winona, you might have some perspectives on this as well.
I would agree. I mean, I was, as a young student at Harvard, I was involved in the Harvard divestment campaign, and you know, we were trying for a long time. And the other thing you learn from that struggle is it takes a while. You know, it doesn't happen overnight. You have to keep building the pressure and you have to keep transforming it. But my alma mater, Harvard, did divest in fossil fuels. They was beginning that process. No such luck for a long time on South Africa, you know, and so you see changes happening. And you know, I have taken a lot of good heart from, you know, the privilege of my experience with South Africa and ANC and the movement there. So take heart. It takes a while.
Maybe the one last thing I would add is the critical importance of ensuring that our resistance to the fossil fuel industry and other industries that are driving us to climate destruction needs to be peaceful. I think that there are people in certain governments and in certain industries that are banking on the anger and the disappointment that young people and others are feeling will manifest themselves in violent resistance activities. I think that if we play into that, we will be doing a disservice to the struggle. That right now, while I can completely understand, especially young people feeling an absolute sense of betrayal, I urge and appeal to young people to make sure that we ensure that our resistance is bold, it's strong, it's courageous, but we ensure that we remain peaceful. Because if we cross that line, we will give those that want to prevent our voices from being heard an excuse to come down and crush us. And just to be clear, they are crushing resistance to injustices of all kinds at the moment, and that's what we are up against. But I think adhering to peaceful ways is critically important. Sorry, over to you.
Hi, my question is about the changing face of colonialism. And we're seeing the fossil fuel industry, the kind of Western states increasingly look towards things like nickel, cobalt, lithium, as materials that they can kind of extract whilst pretending to be green. So what can we as the kind of 21st century environmental movement do to effectively fight against that?
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I mean, because I just had a pipeline shoved down my throat by Canada. It was a very colonial experience. Didn't have anything to do with any UN declarations on the rights of Indigenous people, you know, and that's the way it is with late state addiction. You know, they're going to keep trying to push these things, and then now the latest is the green mining projects for the electric cars. You know, I see that the first thing you got to do is stop your level of consumption. We got to cut back how we behave, you know, because we behave like a bunch of T-Rexes, quite frankly, you know. Then the other thing we got to do is go for the easy answer. One, you know, don't ask me to fill your energy needs in the United States with renewables when you waste 60% of your power between point of origin and point of consumption. Exactly. So get efficient and be responsible. That's what we do. And that generates a tremendous amount of jobs, insulating, rebuilding grid systems, building local energy, and that is more efficient. And it really fundamentally is also about how we relate to each other and how we relate to Mother Earth or our planet, you know. And so the decolonizing involves kind of letting go of your bad behavior and getting back into being the responsible people and societies that we're supposed to be. You know, it's this moment of transformation. You know, we're in the middle of a pandemic. We're sitting here in the bastion of colonialism itself. And I think what we're saying is time to move on. Time to rebuild relationships that are far more just and fair. And I'm optimistic because I believe and I see that change has been made. And I see our prophecies that say which way to go. And I'm all ready to move on the green path, and I think a lot of us are.
I'm optimistic even at a time when a lot of the resistance to injustice is being met with force and repression.
Yes.
Because, as was said many decades ago, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. The good news is the resistance to injustice is not being ignored, is not being laughed at, it's being fought very hard by those in power. And let's hope that if this wisdom is right, then people are just one step away from winning economic justice, social justice, climate justice, gender justice, Indigenous justice, and so on.
Yes. In our hearts, I know that our ancestors are with us and that we are ancestors for those who are not yet here. And I want them to look on me and say, you did a good job, sister. You know, and so that's this time, which is a good opportunity to do the right thing.
That's beautiful. And I think it's good to leave it there.
Be good.
One of the things that I think is hard about social media, considering it's called social media, it's more like monologue media.
What do you think of the word evil? Do you think that there is such a thing? Is it a useful word?
I don't think evil is a useful word.
I think we've seized Al Jazeera now, you and I, to start a cult of love.
Yeah.
You know, love meaning charity towards what is broken in us.